ask about, is it Weimar?
Weimar.
Weimar. Okay, I should have asked you that before. The Weimar. A Weimar story. So I'll turn over to Brandy so we can begin the discussion.
My voice doesn't carry very much. I'm going to take my mask off in order to talk to you. Also, I have to tell you that I'm autistic and I move around a lot when I talk. So I'm going to move this over here so that I don't tip over a bunch of water. And also, I will try not to sprain myself by pulling too far against the thing. But I do move around a lot when I talk. When I was a professor, which I used to be, I absconded from academia. I'm like right, yeah, I know, I escaped. I made escape velocity and boom, there I was gone. And I worked in medical museums. I'm now on TV a lot. I write fiction and I write nonfiction. I just actually finished the edits on a thriller that is being taken out now and by my agent actually today. Right now, probably because it's 5 hours earlier in the United States at the moment. And I wrote 2 mystery novels, both which featured an autistic protagonist, and I was featured in the Washington Post as being sort of as an expose on what it's like to be an autistic person writing about autistic people in a book, so that it the main difference is that it's not the most interesting thing about her. It's just, she's also brunette, so. So I want to say a few words about this book and where it comes from, and I'm going to give you kind of, I think we're doing maybe 20 minutes or so, quick sort of from.
Yeah, maybe I should just give the outline. So
yeah, good.
We'll spend 20 minutes with Brandy giving a talk, and then you can do a reading from the book as well. And then actually the last about 30 minutes would be wonderful. We can have a discussion with the audience and more of a collaborative Q&A,
Mm-hmm.
So that will be for the next 20 minutes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to introduce the book a little bit. I'm going to introduce a particular character, which is really important to me. So this is about Magnus Hirschfeld. How many of you already knew who that was? Okay, a couple of you. Oh, no, a lot of people don't. Oh, that's very exciting. Okay, so I'm a historian. I know a lot of stuff. I was writing a piece for the Scientific American on Michael Dillon, who was the first trans man to have a phalloplasty, and this mention to the Magnus Hirschfeld Institute for Sexology and early transgender or what we think of as modern transgender surgeries. And I went, when was this? Between the early 20th century. And I thought, how do I, as a historian, not know about this? This doesn't make sense, right? I should know. So I start looking into it. How many of you have seen the Nazi bonfire, either as a still image or as a video clip? So, most people have. That picture is the Nazis burning the library of the Institute for Sexology by Magnus Hirschfeld. So we've seen the picture, but we don't remember what they were burning. So I got really interested in why there was this kind of strange schism. And the other question I had was, why is that the first thing the Nazis went after? Why would they go to attack? Come on up. It's all good. Why would they go and attack the Institute for Sexology as the first thing that they went after and burned? And in fact, they burned more books that day than they did subsequently. That seems strange to me. What was so scary about Magnus Hirschfeld, this doctor who studied hormones? What was so frightening about that to the Nazis? And then that got me asking some other questions. Things like, how do we get Nazis? They don't spring fully formed like Athena from the forehead of Zeus. They don't just turn up on you like, hi, Nazis, goose step. They come from somewhere. And so I thought, okay, I want to find out, how do we first begin to hate? How did this happen? And what I've discovered is that hatred is like a snowball rolling downhill. And I went all the way back to the late 19th century. So the book actually starts there to look at how did this rhetoric begin? And a lot of it, and this will probably not surprise you, looking at modern things, especially if you follow what's happening in the United States, which is where I'm from, it's very scary, is it began with misogyny, and then this attacks on women, which were happening in the late 19th century because there was a bunch of changes to gender norms, right? We had industrialization, women wanted to do things like vote and not just be, vases for babies. So they were fighting for rights. That's what they called them, baby vases. They're just baby vases. This is an 18th century concept, but I know, right? They had pictures of it, like women, like vases with just babies in them. So they wanted rights, they wanted control of their reproductive destinies, they were fighting for rights to abortion, they were fighting for all kinds of things, and this, of course, got a backlash. And particularly in Germany, there was this very masculinist rhetoric that grows out of that time period at the end of the 19th century. And it was basically, toxic masculine, uber males, ubermensch, right? This idea that men were in this category, they were very strong and very powerful, and only they had the strength to uphold culture, but were also constantly under threat from women somehow. In fact, there's a man named Friedlander who was like, we must protect all the boys from the dangerous women who could not even vote yet, right? So you had this dual idea. They're dangerous, but also we are very manly men who are very strong, and we must repress them. And this hatred ends up connecting with their homophobia. So, early on in the history of gay rights was a man named Karl Ulrichs, and he was one of the first people to kind of do a public outing of himself in a forum where he was like, this shouldn't be illegal. They had made it illegal in Germany, called Paragraph 175, and they had made it punishable, that you could be arrested and thrown in prison and all these things if you were gay. And he was like, this shouldn't be. Well, the argument had always been that if you were homosexual, you were bad, you were wrong, you were mentally ill. And the reason they thought this, the science they used to say this, is they said, well, it's top down, right? Your brain and your nervous system, they make all the decisions, just like God's in his heaven and it's top-down authority. And so therefore, if you are not fitting into the normal categories that we've developed, you're deviant, you're sick, you're mentally ill. But the problem was, science was actually happening. And they discovered something called hormones, which got named in 1905. Now, they got discovered in a really weird way. There's a guy named Berthold. He had an abiding interest in testicles. There's a couple of those in this period, actually. But he was interested in rooster testicles, so it's kind of a cock and ball story. I'm sorry, there's going to be some of that. So he was taking rooster testicles out of roosters before they went through chicken puberty, and he discovered that they didn't turn into roosters in the normal way. They didn't get coxcombs, and they didn't want to chase the lady chickens, and they didn't get into fights. They just got fluffy and plump. And so then he thought, I'm going to put the testicles back in. So he sticks the testicles back in, but not where they're from. He decides to put them in their stomachs. I think because it was easier. But he thinks to himself, okay, now let's see what happens. And lo and behold, the chicken went through chicken puberty and became a rooster and started running around doing all the rooster things that roosters do. And he thought, this is amazing. The chicken must have regrown the nerves that connect to the brain, since that's what controls everything, right? So he kills the chicken, he takes a look, lo and behold, no nerve tissue anywhere. Blood vessels, yes. And he started thinking, well, maybe something else is going on here. This doesn't actually get fully fleshed out until 1905, but essentially they discovered there was something very tiny that you couldn't see that was influencing your body, and your body had glands all over, like not just up in your head, you had them all over the place. And it suddenly brought in this idea that something natural was happening in your body, and if it was natural, it couldn't be sinful. So the discovery of the hormone ends up birthing sexology as a science, and influences people like Hirschfeld, who take this forward to say, we need to have rights. This is a natural development. People are born this way and they shouldn't be punished for it, and there's all these variations on the spectrum of gender and sexuality, and that's what he argued for. But there was something else discovered in 1905. The word genetics is coined because they start figuring out what genes are. And genes goes on to be a field of genetics eventually, but not before taking a U-turn into eugenics. Yes, thank you. Into eugenics, which is bad. And I tell you this because I found it fascinating early on in my research that you have hormones and genes discovered about the same time, two things that ultimately do lead to endocrine science and genetics, but one leads scientists to say we need to work for LGBTQ rights, and the other eventually informs the Holocaust. And I say this because science doesn't speak for itself. It is not apolitical because science is practiced by humans who are political animals, and science can be degraded, used, twisted in all kinds of ways. At the moment, RFK Jr., a man admittedly with brainworms, is heading up the health sector of my country and saying that people like myself who have autism are going to be cured by September, it's already passed actually, and that Tylenol is my problem. I think he's wrong. So, just to say, it is up to us to grapple with science and to tell those stories. And that's why I wrote this book the way I did. I am a historian. I got a PhD in everything. Not actually in history, it's complicated. I'm a medical humanities person. But this is definitely a historian book. And I did mad amounts of research. Everything in this book is cited. And I wrote it because I wanted you to be able to actually use it that way. So there is a glossary. Terms change a lot, okay? We go from, they didn't even have the word homosexual originally. They didn't have the word gay. Well, they did, but they didn't use it like that. But you did have a word called Uranian, thank you. I know, I wrote the book and I forgot. And that was a term, and they had some other terms, and over time, there were some bad terms too. There were some very ugly terms like sodomite and things like that. It took them a long time to kind of fully get the lesbian thing because men were like, but there was no penis involved, and so for a while they weren't sure that really counted. It does. But my point is, these terms change. So there's a glossary at the end of the book, and the book categorizes, shows you these weird permutations of words and how we use them and what they mean, and it explains a lot of why I use the words I do. And the reason the book is called The Intermediaries is that was the term Hirschfeld finally lands on, because he's like, okay, we need a bigger word. And he liked that word for a couple reasons. Intermediary, like in evolution, intermediate forms. So he was saying, well, there's the spectrum. If you've got absolute man on one side and absolute woman on the other side, which he said were both fictions, everyone else is in the middle, and you have these intermediate forms. But he also used it, he was a mediary. He was intermediating for his patients, for other people. And so it's a great word, and that's what he ended up using to describe gender non-conforming people. They were also called transvestites, but he realized that word didn't really work because it wasn't really about clothes. And so that's why Intermediaries is born. So this story needs to be told. I wanted to make sure that everything that was in here is actually cited. In addition to the glossary, there are endnotes. And I had to fight my publisher for this. They don't like superscript numerals. They're like, oh, people don't like those. I was like, I think they do. I think they like to know where you got your information from. So we still have that because I threatened to leave. I was like, nope, I will leave. I did. There are photographs. Some of these are the first time these photographs have been published. There's character biographies because I realize there's a lot of people in this book and they have sort of long German names. And there's a timeline. And it is probably the most comprehensive timeline of this period that actually includes the science, the politics, and the various transgender and homosexual rights stuff all happening at once, so you kind of see the whole landscape. So that's in there for you. It is a history book, but it's also like Star Wars. Because this is the Rebel Alliance, and they are fighting the Empire, and it's amazing because similar to, in the end, it's kind of Empire Strikes Back, sort of, but they escape, there's a remnant, and they get away. And so it's exciting, it's meant to be. You're supposed to read this and go, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And in order to tell that story, I needed a character that we could follow that wasn't Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld is a really interesting guy, but he's also a guy, and he wasn't one of his patients. And I wanted to tell the story through how did these things occur, and I didn't want to use Lily Elba. Who knows who Lily Elba is? The Danish Girl movie was. She's often thought of. She is a transgender pioneer, but she's often thought of as the first, but she's not. The first was Dora Richter. And Dora Richter she's just not glamorous. She wasn't well known. She didn't have any money. She was blue collar, working class. an every person. And I wanted an every person to tell the story. The problem is, it's really hard to find information because of that bonfire at the beginning there. So what I discovered was often about hunting the fringes and edges and archives and sometimes determining the shape of something from the hole that it left. But along the way, I heard tell that there was a dissertation. And in this dissertation, so basically when Dora Richter came, she had to do an intake interview. They always did this. And a doctor who was sort of doing his residency, his name was Werner Holz, he took the intake interview, and later he decided to get a PhD and write a dissertation. And I suppose because this probably increased the word count, he included the entire questionnaire inside the dissertation. And there was one copy left on Earth. It was typed on onion skin paper. Do you know what that is? It's like the see-through paper in faded blue ink, super fragile, super breakable, only existed in the Berlin archives of the Humboldt University Special Collections. Also, this was COVID. So I naturally did, and I'm going to tell you, this now becomes slightly stand-up comedy for a minute. I'm going to tell you how hard it is sometimes to get information, but how important it is because she is our star on this show. I called the people at the Special Collections and I said, okay, I see that you have this. Could I have a digitized, your PDF, your digitized version? And they said, oh, we don't have one of those. I said, oh, okay, can I pay to have it digitized? And they said, no. So I said, okay, could I send somebody to do, I have friends in Germany, could I send somebody to digitize it? And they said, no, you have to come here if you want it. And they explained it, but not in ways that I can explain back to you because it never actually made sense to me. And I said, well, it's COVID. And they're like, So I bought a plane ticket and I decided, okay, I'm flying to Berlin. And it involved so many nose swabs. Like I just walked up to places like this, like, okay. So I land in Berlin, and right as all of this is happening, Russia invades Ukraine, which is not very far away from Berlin, and so all these refugees are coming, and I somehow managed to pick a hotel that was right next to the Russian consulate, which is now covered in razor wire, and there's people with guns. And I was just like, well, of course I'm from the United States, so I'm sort of used to people with guns, so it's okay. So I was like, okay, it's fine, I'm here to do work. I'm gonna go to the Special Collections, and of course I'm a professional, so I dressed up. I wore a wool suit, a black wool suit, very fetching. This is an important part of the story, it'll come back. And brand new shoes, also going to come back to haunt me anyway. And I went to the Special Collections. I'm very excited, I've got my mask, I've got all the things, and I go in, and if you've ever been to Special Collections, you have to take your belongings and lock them up, and you have like a plastic bag that you carry around with your phone or whatever. I knew this. I go to the basement, there are lockers, there are no locks. I said, excuse me, where are the locks? Well, we don't have them. It's like, oh, where can I get them? We don't know. So I wandered off into Berlin, and I found a lock that I bought, that I brought back. So I go down to the basement, fine, we're good, it's fine. Lock up my belongings, and asked where Special Collections were. They're on the 6th floor. Is there an elevator? And they looked at me very strange, so I walked up 6 flights of stairs, and I walked into Special Collections. Hello, I am Brandy Schillace. You've heard about me already. I've sent you lots of emails. I have filled out all the online forms. I got your 42 pages of instructions. I'm here. I would like the document. And she said, great, I need your library card. And I showed her the online library card, and she's like, no, the real library card. Well, where do I get that? On the 1st floor. So I went back down 6 flights of stairs. It's fine. I walk up to the desk, and I say, hi, I need to turn this into a real thing so that I can go upstairs and get my documents. And she said, no problem, no problem. What is your permanent address in Germany? And I was like, I flew on a plane? Like, I landed here yesterday. I don't live here. And she goes, oh, then I cannot help you. And I thought about that movie National Treasure for a minute. Like, I thought, do I have to steal the Constitution? I wonder how good the security is here. And it's Germany, and I thought probably pretty good because I saw people with guns earlier, and I thought, well, okay. So I said, is there anyone else we can talk to? Sure. So someone comes out, and they're like, oh, you just wanted a temporary card. Yes, I am here for 3 days. Oh, okay, well, we can do that. Well, that's good, because I was thinking, like, is it hot? It's hot in here. Is it warm? They hand me my card, and I head back up to the 6th floor, and I give her my card, and she's like, great, she has it. She has it in her hand. She's holding it out to me, and there's a very fancy machine that I'm going to, make the special digitize it. They have to be special machines when it's brittle, and so it's the whole thing. She says, great, I just need your university copy card. Where are those? Downstairs on the 1st floor. So there were 42 pages of instruction. None of this was in there. Not any of that was in there. So go down and I go to the 1st floor and I need to get money out of my wallet. So I go to the basement, I get the copy card, I head back upstairs and I give her my copy card. I think, okay, we're good. I should mention there are other people here. Like, it's a reading room. Like, they're just watching this American be like, and then come back, what? And then do it again. So, okay, she says, do you have your USB stick? And I did, because I read 42 pages of instructions. And I said, okay, here we go. She goes, plug it in the machine. So I do. And the machine says, please plug in your USB stick. And I was like, please plug in your USB stick. We did not see a USB stick anywhere, and I'm like showing it to the machine, like it's right here. So the librarian says, well, it must be broken. You'll have to get another one. I said, well, but it's new. Can I plug this into your machine? And she's like, no, that would be a violation, and I could get a virus. And I'm like, all right, fine. Do you sell I don't know why I asked. Do you sell USB sticks? No, you do not do that. Okay. So I had to go looking for one. So I leave. It's past lunch. And I haven't eaten, and my feet hurt a lot. And it's warm. And I'm wandering, going, where? I don't actually speak German very well. And so I'm wandering around going, where would you find a USB stick? I don't know. I think, oh, drugstores. Drugstores have that, and they sell SD cards, because I thought, I'm no fool. I'm going to get 2 methods of saving material. So it's like 2 miles before I find one. And again, with the feet and the coat, and it's all a bad idea. Tennis shoes, trainers, that would have been good. So I walk in and I find a USB stick and an SD card, and then I get up to the counter and I realize my wallet is in a locker, but I had to buy that copy card, so I had 11 euros exactly in my back pocket, and I thought, okay. So I found a tiny USB stick and the smallest SD card I have ever seen. You could have implanted it under the skin. But I had enough money, I bought it, and I head back to the Humboldt Library, and I go up to the 6th floor, and I'm sweaty, and I'm unhappy, and I'm like, okay. So I plug the brand new USB stick in, and of course it's like, we do not see a USB stick, and I was like, ha! I have an SD card. But I can't get it open because my hands are so sweaty, and I haven't eaten lunch, and so I'm shaky, and it's weird, and I'm like getting like the room is kind of, and so the librarian says, no problem, I'll open it. And this tiny, it flies, it goes up, and it doesn't land, it just disappears, it just vanishes into space. So we fast forward a little bit, and I'm on all fours. I've divested myself of my jacket, sweat stains like the size of Saturn, and I'm down with a ruler, like pulling dead bugs with paper clips out from underneath shit. And then, and the librarian is helping. She has a tiny dustbin and a tiny broom, and she is doing this. Sweeping nothing. She's just like looking useful. And finally, at this point, it is like the library's going to close. It's been all day. The library's going to close. I am sitting on the floor. I've just given up on having any dignity. I'm sitting on the floor, legs out in front of me, spread wide, like just full-on man-spreading, stains, sweat, like hair everywhere. And I just look at her and I go, so what now? And she says, well, I could digitize it and email it to you. I'm glad you have that feeling, because that was a lot of what I was feeling as well. And my head like spun around 3 times, like in The Exorcist. And then she says, well, often, important word, often when the machine doesn't recognize a USB stick, we just turn it off and back on again. So she does this, and magically it recognizes my USB stick. And then, and I'm not making this up, I swear to you, this was absolute truth. I'm a historian. She looked at me in my face and in perfect English said, "Sometimes there just needs to be enough despair in the air." German librarians, my friend. So I did scan the document. I did put it on the USB stick, and then I turned to her and I said, "I'm going to put this in your computer, and I'm going to see if my stuff's actually on this drive before I walk out of here." And she says, "No, no, no." And I said, "I think we can." And I don't know what my face was doing, but she agreed. I out-Germaned this one. She was like, "Oh, okay, yes." So it was there, and I took it away with me, and I got it. And I got home, and 2 weeks later, they digitized it and put it online for free. Don't despair. Don't despair. I'm pretty sure I'm why. I think they were like, "We do not want her coming back here." So that is what it took to get Dora's story out of Germany. But Dora's story is beautiful. Dora, I'm going to actually read just a little snippet here. There's a book right here. This is actually just a paragraph, but I think it gives you an impression of what my writing is. Standing on one foot is hard. Thank you. I'm losing it.
Which part is
I'm looking for chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3. I just forget what page it's on. Somehow that's chapter 6. So that's 44. Thank you. Oh. In the far south of Saxony, along the Czech-German border, rises a Hercynian block, the tilted after effects of a tectonic plate collision. Like a mountain heaved onto its side, the geography presents a stunningly steep escarpment to Bohemia and a gentle, rolling landscape to the German interior. Known as the Krušné hory in Czech and the Urs in German for the ore located within, this sideways spine held secret riches. Cobalt and copper, silver and zinc, but also the uranium used in thermal spas and colored glass, the mineral behind mountain sickness, which would one day be responsible for scorched earth and atom bombs. This was an isolated, rural, fable-shrouded region, and Dora Richter was born on the steep side of the mountain. Dora Richter lived in a very, very small town. She mostly just knew people who were in her family. But by the time she was 3 years old, though she had been christened Rudolph, she knew she was a girl. Until they're 3, most kids at that period, they would wear like these sort of floppy clothes. They weren't like differentiated by sex. About the age of 3, they would put boys in trousers and girls in dresses. And Dora refused to wear trousers. She just wouldn't do it. She had an absolute conniption fit. She was so upset. This continued throughout her childhood. Her father would catch her wearing the girls' clothes, would beat her, and she did it anyway. So she was 3 when she first makes this realization about herself. She describes a period where she actually sees the genitals of another little girl and is horrified to see that she has something that doesn't look right for a girl. And she tries, actually, to remove her own phallus with a string tied around it. She's caught, and they stop her from doing that, which is actually good because she might have gone septic. And so then she contemplates cutting it off with a razor, but she faints at the sight of blood. So distressed she is that she couldn't remove this thing that she found hateful, that she tries to commit suicide for the first time. She was 13. She swallowed nails. She survived, thankfully. But she was 13. She was 3 when she first realizes it. By the time she's 13, she cannot perceive living this way anymore. She lived in a tiny town on the side of a mountain. She'd never met another gay person. She certainly hadn't met a trans person. So when people try to say that you catch this from TikTok There's no TikTok for Dora. So Dora actually ended up living a double life as soon as she got away from home. So she would live as a woman often as she could. Sometimes she lived as a woman for whole years together at a time, and she was an actress, she was a waitress, she did other tryst things, but she also dated, and she had boyfriends, but she was always afraid that if she was with anybody too long, they would find out, because her first boyfriend discovers her secret, and he's horrified, and she's heartbroken. So what ends up happening is that Dora falls in love all the time. She loves love. She loves flowers and birds and music and love, and she's just this like effervescent character who's unsinkable in nature, but she's afraid to love anybody too long. She even has somebody ask her to marry him, and then that very night she packs up her stuff and she leaves town because she can't face telling him the truth. And so this goes on until she is a grown woman. She's in her 40s, I think, or late 30s anyway, when she has a boyfriend who also discovers her secret, but by now, Hirschfeld has been busy. Hirschfeld wrote a lot, because basically he would write something, and then like at first he was like, okay, there's men and women, there's gay people, and they should be okay. And then he realizes, oh, there's some other people. Okay, there's men and women, and there's gay people, and there's these transvestites. So there's 3 genders. And then he's like, nope, that's not enough. So then he would write another book. So every time he learned something new, he's like, book, we'll write a book. And so there's a lot of books. And at one point, he basically decided there was like 40 million combinations of gender. Like he had a little mathematical formula for it. And that it's everyone in between. And that he felt that it was quite common. And he did all kinds of like surveys and everything. So by the time Dora is figured out by this boyfriend much later in her life, she's crushed. She's like, I know you hate me now. And he's like, no, I've read about this. He's like, I think I know what this is. You should go. And so he basically convinces her to go to Berlin. He doesn't break up with her. He convinces her to go to Berlin. And she learns about Hirschfeld. And she goes to the Hirschfeld Institute. And she ends up becoming the first person to undergo what we think of as modern gender reassignment or gender-confirming surgery. She stays there. She doesn't have a lot of money. So she ends up working it off. He basically does the surgery, or they do the surgery, and then she works there as a maid. And she becomes kind of den mom to all the other maids. And she's really this lovely character. And we thought for a long time that she died in 1933 when they came to take those books that I told you about in the beginning. But through research, not just research I was doing, because you can research in archives and you can research books, and you can talk to other academics and you can read other academic books, but you want to know one of the best sources for finding information about historical trans people are? Trans people. Trans people. So there's all kinds of transgender people who've been doing this research for ages. And I'm on the sort of non-binary spectrum, but like I was new to the game by comparison to some of these folks. And Clara Hartman and I were friends. We'd both been looking for Dora, and I shared with her what I was finding out. And one day she contacted me and she's like, Brandy, you're not going to believe what I think I just found something. She discovered that Dora's birth records had been altered, and they don't do that posthumously. And it was in the 40s. She's like, she literally listed as Dora, changed the gender and everything was changed. And so she ends up, she's like, I think I know where she went. So Clara goes to the town. I was like, what are you going to do? She's like, I'm bought a ticket already. So she goes to the town where she knew Dora had ended up migrating back to Germany after the war. And she finds out that Dora actually lived like long enough to like know who the Beatles were. Like she was there. So she goes to this town, and this is hilarious to me. She goes and finds the oldest people she can find. She just went around being like, how old are you? Not old enough. Okay. And then she just wandered around. And then she'd ask them if they knew anybody named Dora Richter. And it is a small enough town that she found 2 people. And they said, oh, yes, she was the laughing old lady who kept a bird in her purse. So she kept a bird in her purse, and what it was is she would take it with her, and then when she would have tea out and biscuits, she would like open the purse and feed the bird. And these guys were kids when that was very affecting to them. You see a kid being like, do you know what she has in her purse? So she outlived all her haters, all her detractors. She outlived the Nazis. And so, again, Star Wars story. The people that were impacted by Hirschfeld, they go on. And so this story is a hopeful story. It's a story about joy and resilience and living your best life and living an authentic life, and how joy is an act of resistance, and how living as yourself is an act of radical defiance. And so I hope that you will enjoy this book, that you will read it, that you will share it with your friends. In a moment like we're having right now, I think it's really important to have stories about joy and hope. And, you know, they don't have lightsabers, but I mean, otherwise, it's that kind of story. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got about 20 minutes, and because I'm a very reasonable person, I had tagged all of these as potential questions. And so that's not going to happen, and I am instead, I'm just going to kick off, if you don't mind, Brandy, and that's just tap your book in case you want to reference it. I'll just leave it here on my note. And I'll do something which I don't normally do, but for some reason, I was really struck by the first sentence of your acknowledgements, in which you said the book would not exist without the aid provided by numerous colleagues, scholars, activists, editors, and friends within the LGBTQ plus community. And I thought that would be a great place to start in terms of your process. You did touch upon this in the end, you know, you're talking about having a friend that went to go find out what happened to Dora. But I thought maybe you can talk about this community as you were writing this book.
All books are written by communities, really. Even though I did a lot of the research, Laura Moorhofer, Katie Sutton, there's all kinds of people in the bibliography that you can go to as well that have done the research which allowed me to kind of hopscotch and tie all these stories together. But also I spoke to Susan Stryker, and I spoke to all kinds of peers and folks who have been in the LGBT community for a long time. Other transgender people, and I had beta readers who were transgender, because trying to really talk about how to do terminology right in a book like this where you're covering so much time, and also not being triggering in any way, was really important to me. And so, you know, a lot of people came together to make this happen.
And then I'll ask one more question. I really do want this to be more of a conversation, and I don't know how this will work passing the mic around. They seem pretty long.
Maybe you guys can just shout.
No, they're not. Sorry. They're
not. Yeah, you guys don't have to yell.
And I'll repeat it so that, because I know there are people who but anyway, to go to another thing which you had written about, and so much of this struck me because of what Mark Twain said, where he says history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And as I was reading this book, there was so much of this coming back and saying, oh yeah, I'm seeing that right now. Oh yes, I'm seeing that right now. And it seems cyclical, you know, in terms of how often this keeps coming back. And just to point to one thing, on page 254, the Nazi ideal was based on white, heterosexual, and normative, that is cisgender masculinity masquerading as genetic superiority. You did speak about this. You spoke about genetics, and you actually, what I wanted to tie this in is you do have a piece here where you talk about another etymology of the world, and that is genocide.
Yeah.
And how that again leads to that process. And so I thought, you know, not to be too doom and gloom, but to discuss how you saw that fitting into this process.
So writing this book in the United States was a trip. There were days when I would finish writing and then watch the news and I was literally like, did I just manifest that? Did I make that happen? Like, it was so lockstep. And I can tell you that the United States is well past 1933 at this point. We actually have tanks in streets already. So, and it's a terrifying time to be there. But it's true everywhere. We're seeing a lot. What you had back then, you had the plague, you had the 1918 flu, followed by massive instability economically. And when that happens, people look for someone to blame, and they look for easy answers, and fascists love that kind of climate. They thrive in that climate, principally because they will promise things that have no backing, that have no science, they haven't done any critical analysis. They'll just say, this will make it better, and it's those people's fault. And there's a lot of people, when they're hurting and confused and unstable, that's a new word I just made up, that they'll go to those easy answers. And so a lot of this is about us resisting easy answers. And also resisting division, because Laura Moorhofer has a great book about the rise of gay rights and race and racism, because so much of the gay rights movement ended up being like really white, not because there weren't people of color and other minorities in the process, but because they got edged out. And that's really important to see how we accidentally do our own divisions, because we need to be unified, because basically when we're unified, they can't beat us in a fair fight.
Thank you. I do want to turn over for the conversation with the audience, so if there's anyone who's been holding on to some questions, please do throw your hand up, and if you want to walk up to the mic, you can. I have
Or you can just
COVID, so
shout.
I'm going to stay seated. I'm not being, or you could shout, but yeah, anyone in the audience have a question? Or a comment?
Yeah. Come on, I really like it when you guys talk to me. Yes.
What was the most interesting thing that was sort of unexpected that you could possibly?
The most interesting and unexpected thing is also the most hopeful thing, which is partly Dora surviving, that was part of it, but the other thing is that Nazis were really dumb. Like, they weren't smart or good, they were just good at breaking things, and toddlers can do that. And so I think we have had a tendency since World War II to kind of think that they were smart and like a foregone conclusion, and like it was inevitable that you'd end up with Nazis. Nazis and fascists are not inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way in my country. It doesn't have to be that way here. In fact, the story shows repeatedly how there almost weren't Nazis. Repeatedly, we almost didn't get Nazis. It was a near thing that we had just the right kind of situation that they were able to take control. So that is the hope and the joy and the surprise, that Nazis are not a foregone conclusion, and regardless of what's happening right now in the news, here in Germany, in the United States, we don't have to lay down. They want you to think they're a foregone conclusion, so you don't fight back. And we can fight back and we can stop it, and that is good news.
Sarah?
So what were the right conditions for Nazis?
So I'm not sure if I can make this simplified enough to make a coherent answer, but essentially you had a vote that was coming up, the fact that the Nazis did not have a majority, but a scare. The Nazis had driven people to be so afraid of communism that they didn't align, the socialists and communists didn't line up for it. And then you had basically a leader of the German government, of the Weimar, hadn't fallen yet, who was quite weak and afraid of losing power to his rival, who decided to allow he thought Hitler would help defeat his enemy. So you had a whole bunch of things happening like that. There was literally 24 hours and they would have had the proper vote, but the vote happened before, it came down to like 24 hours and things might not have happened this way. And so that was a really quick and dirty, and I explain it more clearly in the book, but I literally was reading it going, maybe they'll stop. I knew they wouldn't because I know history, but I was like, maybe they'll stop it. That's how close it was. And I thought, wow, we've got our own hair triggers right now that we should be paying attention to, and we got to try and stop it before it gets to that point. Yes, pretty much. I think some of it is that Hirschfeld, one of the things this book talks a lot about is how Hirschfeld built community. He actually wrote a prescription for people, it exists. There's a prescription where he wrote, go to this many gay bars and this many, because he realized that some of what was wrong with us is what we didn't know, we thought we were alone. And so building community, they brought, straight people came to the Institute too. It wasn't just gay people. They did marriage counseling. They had big Christmas parties and people brought their kids, and it was so wholesome, And people did marriage counseling because they could actually get straight answers about sex from the Sex Institute. And they had these wonderful balls where they would dress up at these gala events, and they realized that you had to have joy along the way while you were fighting. You had to have community and joy, and that you aren't supposed to feel bad all the time. You're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to celebrate birthdays and have binge watching parties, and that's not you not doing the work. That's part of the work. And I think that's something that got said a lot during the AIDS epidemic too, in the 80s, where I forget now who said it, but they said, we visited, you visited the sick in the morning and you protested in the afternoon, and at night we danced, because that's what gives you the strength and the power to go on. And so reaching out to your local communities, building bridges, making sure that we're not dividing and not leaving people behind, and then also accepting that joy is part of how we win, because they don't have any. Like, look at them. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene's face. There's no joy.
This is more of a comment, really. I think the other thing is that the Institute was founded in 1919, destroyed in 1933, but for decades before that, Hirschfeld had, and he wasn't a lone wolf either, and nor were any of the people at the Institute. So he was working, he had already been attempting in the 1890s to petition the German government to decriminalize, or to remove, actually.
He actually got the certificates you could carry that would
You
actually.
could get the Transvestitenschein, which is like a certificate that you can carry in your wallet. If a policeman stops you, you can say, actually,
I have a medical excuse. A doctor's
I'm
excuse.
pass, I'm allowed to wear this clothes. But also he'd been working with the socialist political parties. There were members of the Communist Party Central Committee that were working at the Institute as well. So this was kind of a long, his first attempt to decriminalise paragraph 175 was in 1898.
Yes, yeah.
With the parliamentary petition that only just narrowly lost. And so there was quite a large political project to try and do this, and also there was an environment of, you could buy magazines on a street corner in Berlin.
Oh yeah.
In 1920, a monthly magazine that would tell you where all the lesbian bars were.
Right, I know. And there was a lot of them too.
Yeah.
They sounded great.
There was like a large political effort, and I think in talking about Hirschfeld, often we kind of make the mistake of thinking that this was this kind of like little island out in the Atlantic Ocean of paradise for queer and trans people, but it did fit into a larger infrastructure.
It did, and for time and space reasons, I didn't talk about all those things, but the book talks quite a lot about the other. Who he was in conversation with, who he was correcting, who he was agreeing with. Also, the masculinist folks who were homosexual but were sometimes his allies and sometimes his enemies, and that's, like I said, it starts in the 19th century, because I realized it doesn't start in the right in the 20th century. It particularly doesn't start in 1918, but it's a wonderful way of seeing how you can have a very permissive culture that nonetheless doesn't actually provide protections. And that was the big thing, that was why paragraph 175, because I think even I often wonder, like, why was that so important? Because that was a law on the book, and they thought if they could overturn a law on the book, that's a much more effective way of saying, okay, we're building protections in, not the protections can't be overturned, I say again from the United States, but it is true that as much as there was permissibility, that isn't protection. You do have to, and he understood that really well. And not all, and I think the masculinists did not. The masculinists thought that they were going to be safe. They thought that some of them joined the Nazi Party. They were overlooked, their homosexuality was overlooked until it didn't need to be. And then there was the Night of Long Knives, and everybody got purged. So, often we look around in culture and think, okay, things are pretty good now, but until you actually get legislation on your side, I don't want to say it's empty words. It's not empty. The Weimar was really permissive, and people really did have these freedoms, but those freedoms didn't ultimately end up being protections, and that's the shame of it. Yeah.
What I wanted to say, just to contribute, is that what I found really striking about this book is the gap in knowledge about Europe that I had. I come from a country that was colonized by the British, so I have a good understanding of how that Victorian history has imported a new type of homophobia. I don't like to talk about pre-colonial Africa, some utopia for LGBT, but the homophobia and transphobia that we have now is not what the type that it had before. And I learned so much through this book just about how this transpired through sexuality through the German narrative as opposed to the British narrative. And for example, I didn't know that at the time Jewish people were seen as pariahs sexually, as they were threats.
And feminine. That was what I was saying. The part of the misogyny was also wrapped into anti-Semitism too. And I was very surprised. I did not know that. I didn't realize that the part of anti-Semitism in Germany at this point was them claiming that Jewish men were too feminine, and that both that their femininity allowed them to prey on women, and also that it made them somehow, making other people gay. And this was, honestly, this is why Hitler, when Hitler said Hirschfeld is the most dangerous Jew in Germany, it was partly because of that. He was using all of these different types of narratives. And of course, by the way, Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism. That was happening anyway, but he used it in specific kinds of ways, specifically to attack Hirschfeld. And I think it was Hirschfeld's ability to build community and all of these collaborations and things that he was doing was why they went after the Institute first, why they went after Hirschfeld. Yeah.
So we've got 6 minutes, which is enough time to have wrap up the conversation. So I do want to turn back to the audience in case there were any other questions.
If there's not, I do have something I'd like to say, which is one of the clearest, I spent a lot of time